My father died alone, but at his funeral, someone else grieved like she'd lost him too. Light fell in thin, tired lines through the stained glass, touching faces that didn't want to be seen. I stood by the aisle, pretending to listen to the priest. My eyes kept drifting toward her. She stood 3 pews behind the family, a white scarf wrapped around her neck like it was hiding something. Her hands were clasped too tightly, fingers pale against the black of her coat. Everyone else looked at the casket. She looked at me. It had been 10 years since I last saw my father. Even longer since I'd spoken his name without bitterness. I came back because the pastor had called. He said there was no one else to claim the body. That sounded like my father, always alone, even when people tried to love him. The service felt rehearsed, like a play everyone had performed too many times. The same hymns, the same soft sobs. Only the nurse didn't sing. She stood still, her lips pressed tight, as if silence itself was the only thing she could offer. The air inside was cold enough to keep flowers from wilting. Outside, snow kept falling, slow, steady, without sound. When the priest said, "Let us pray," she bowed her head, but her eyes didn't close, and for a second, I thought she was looking not at the coffin, but through it. I tried to place her. Maybe she was from the clinic where he spent his last days. But something about her didn't fit. Her uniform looked too crisp, too clean. The kind people wear for goodbyes, not work. When the final hymn ended, chairs scraped, feet shuffled, and people began to leave, whispering condolences they didn't mean. But she didn't move. I waited until the church emptied. Only the echoes remained. Footsteps fading down the aisle, doors closing softly, the smell of wax and cold perfume. She was still there, standing by the last pew, her hands now resting on the seat in front of her. I walked closer, the wood creaking under my shoes. "Were you his nurse?" I asked. She lifted her head slowly. Her eyes, light gray, almost silver, studied me for too long. Then she nodded once. "Yes," she said. Her voice was quiet, measured. "I took care of him." Something in the way she said it felt rehearsed, too careful. Like she had practiced those words in her mouth before using them. "Thank you," I said, though I didn't know if I meant it. He wasn't an easy man to care for. She gave a faint smile. "He spoke of you," she said. Her gaze dropped to her gloves, and she adjusted them even though they fit perfectly. "What did he say?" I asked. She hesitated. "That you used to bring him apples from the garden. The green ones. He said they tasted like forgiveness." I almost laughed. My father hadn't eaten fruit in years, but the image of those apples, small, sour, still growing, made something tighten in my chest. The nurse glanced toward the coffin. Her expression softened. "Sometimes," she whispered. "He looked like he was waiting for someone." "Waiting?" "Yes." She paused. "He never said who." Her voice trembled on the last word. Not from the cold. From something else. The lights in the church flickered once, then steadied. A caretaker appeared in the doorway, asking if we needed more time. I nodded, and the nurse murmured, "Just a moment," before stepping toward the casket. Her shoes made no sound against the stone floor. She stood there for a long time, looking down at him. Then she removed one glove and reached out, fingers barely brushing the edge of the wood. It wasn't the way people touch the dead. It was gentler, personal, like she was trying to remember something she'd already lost. I stayed where I was, feeling like an intruder. When she spoke, her voice was almost a breath. He used to hum in his sleep, the same song, over and over. I didn't answer. My father never hummed when I was near. Her hand lingered on the coffin. For a heartbeat, I thought she might cry. But instead, she smiled. A small, broken smile that looked more like regret. Then she turned to me. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" She didn't answer. She slipped her glove back on and adjusted the scarf around her throat. Her eyes met mine one last time, steady, searching, as if she wanted to be sure I saw her clearly. Then she walked past me, leaving the faint scent of lavender and something sharper, antiseptic maybe, or hospital air. The heavy church doors groaned open, and cold wind rushed in, snuffing out one of the candles near the altar. By the time I stepped outside, she was already halfway down the road, her white scarf trailing behind her like a ribbon of smoke. I stood by the grave later that afternoon, watching the ground swallow him inch by inch. The snow kept falling, soft, endless, patient. People said their final words, but I stayed silent. All I could think of was her touch. The way she laid her hand on the coffin, like she was confessing to it. When I closed my eyes, I saw her again. The woman in white, standing behind us, watching. Not like a stranger. More like someone who'd been waiting for this moment, too. Maybe she was sorry for him, maybe for herself, or maybe, though I couldn't yet understand why, she was sorry for me. The snow covered the last of the flowers. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of lavender back toward me. And for the first time that day, I shivered, not from cold, but from the feeling that my father's story hadn't ended yet. Just changed hands. The house still smelled like him. Faint tobacco, liniment, and the sharp scent of winter that crept in through the cracks. I unlocked the door with the same brass key I'd used as a child, though it no longer fit as easily. The lock hesitated, like the house was deciding whether to let me in. The hallway light flickered when I found the switch. Everything was still, where it had always been. The crooked mirror, the shoes lined neatly by the door, his old coat hanging like it still carried his shape. I stood there for a long time, afraid to breathe too deeply, afraid the air itself would remember me. The silence pressed close. Houses remember things, especially the things you try to forget. His bedroom was colder than the rest. The curtains were drawn, but thin light from the street bent through the fabric, painting the walls in dull gold. Dust floated through the beam like slow snow. His bed was stripped. No sheets, no blankets, only the outline of where he had lain. I could almost see the weight of him still pressed into the mattress. The drawers were open, half-emptied. Papers scattered across the floor. Old bills, medical notes, torn envelopes. I picked one up. It was blank. Just a smudge of ink where something had been written and then erased. He'd never been one for tidiness, but this mess felt deliberate, like someone had searched, not cleaned. I touched the headboard. The wood was cold, smooth, worn thin by years of restless nights. There were scratches at the top corner, little marks that might have been from his rings or his shaking hands. On the nightstand sat one thing left untouched, a photograph. It was curled at the edges, trapped beneath a glass of water that had gone stale. My hand shook a little when I lifted it. The image was simple. My father, standing beside a nurse, The nurse's face was turned away, caught mid-motion. She wore white. Always white. His expression in the photo was soft. I hadn't seen that softness in years. His eyes were looking somewhere past her shoulder, like the moment was shared but unspoken. The nurse's hand was on his arm, light but certain. I turned the photo over. On the back, in faded blue ink, 2 words, "Thank you," no signature. Just that. I traced the letters with my thumb. It didn't look like his handwriting. The loops were too careful too. Gentle. My father wrote like he lived. Sharp, fast, leaving scratches behind. This was someone else's hand. Someone who meant it. I sat on the edge of the bed. The springs groaned. The air felt heavier now, as if I'd disturbed a room that had been holding its breath. Whoever that nurse was, she wasn't just his caretaker. You don't keep a photo like that unless there's something inside it you're afraid to lose. Outside, a branch tapped against the window in a slow rhythm. The sound reminded me of nights I'd spent awake here as a child, listening for him to come home from his late shifts. The same steady tap, the same long waiting. I opened the wardrobe. Inside hung only 2 shirts, pressed and folded. Beneath them, an old wooden box, the one he used to keep letters from my mother. When I opened it, I found it empty. Not even dust. That emptiness said more than words could. I looked around. His life had been stripped down to fragments. 1 photograph, 1 empty box, 1 glass of water left to die on the table. A part of me wanted to believe it was just the hospice staff tidying up, clearing the space. But something about the missing things, the careful selection of what was gone, didn't feel random. Someone had been here after him, someone who knew exactly what they wanted to take. I carried the photograph to the kitchen. The light there was warmer, though the bulbs hummed faintly, tired. I set it under the lamp. The nurse's posture was strange, half-turned, as if avoiding the camera or hiding something. There was something about the curve of her neck, the way the scarf folded under her chin. Familiar, almost painfully so. I tried to remember her face from the funeral, that quiet woman in white who hadn't cried. Could it be her? The thought made the room smaller, like the walls were leaning in to listen. I poured a glass of water and sat down, staring at the picture. The silence in the house wasn't empty. It was layered. Like sometimes grief does that. It fills a room until you mistake memory for presence. But this felt different. This felt like someone else's memory bleeding into mine. The refrigerator clicked on, humming low. The pipes groaned once, then nothing. In that stillness, I imagined my father sitting in this same spot, holding that same photo. Maybe he stared at it the way I was now, searching for something he couldn't say out loud. Maybe he whispered her name, or maybe he never dared to. He wasn't a man built for confession. But everyone leaves traces, even in silence. The heater kicked in with a tired rattle, pushing warm air that smelled faintly of rust. I could almost hear his voice in it, low, deliberate, always just on the edge of apology. I wondered what he'd meant to tell me. The photo trembled slightly under the draft from the vent. For a moment, it caught the light in such a way that her hair, the nurse's, seemed almost silver. I thought of her eyes at the funeral. Gray, watching, measuring. The air in my chest tightened. I went back to his room and sat again by the bed. The imprint of him was still there, faint but visible, like the house hadn't yet accepted he was gone. I ran my fingers over the pillowcase. It was smooth, cold, empty. That's when I noticed something beneath the mattress corner, a folded piece of fabric tucked deep in. I pulled it free. It was a handkerchief, embroidered with small, neat letters. LWI didn't know what the initials meant then. But I would. I held it to my nose. Faint lavender, the same scent that lingered on her scarf at the funeral. The same that followed me when she left the church. It made my throat tighten, not from grief, but from recognition. I looked back at the photo. The nurse's hand rested exactly where my father's heart would have been, and I wondered, why would my father keep a photo of someone who never showed her face? The question followed me out of the room, down the hall, and into the quiet kitchen. Outside, the snow had started again. Thin flakes drifted past the window, catching the yellow light like falling ash. I left the photo on the table. The house seemed to exhale as I closed the door behind me. A long, tired sigh. And for the first time, I understood what the silence had been trying to say all along. He hadn't died alone. Someone had been here. Someone who knew the truth long before I came looking for it. The clinic smelled like bleach and rain. Someone had just mopped the hallway, and the floor still shone wet under the flickering ceiling light. My footsteps felt too loud, too deliberate, like I didn't belong there. Outside, the storm had passed, but the air still trembled with the echo of it. I kept my father's name written on a small slip of paper, as if I might forget it once I said it aloud. The receptionist looked up when I approached, a woman with tired eyes and a pale pink cardigan. Her smile was the kind people wear when they've said it 100 times already. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for my father's records," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. "He passed away last week. Hart, Leonard Hart." She typed the name slowly, keys clacking in a rhythm that felt almost ceremonial. I waited. Watched the clock above her head tick through seconds that stretched longer than they should. Her frown came before her words did. "I'm sorry. I don't see any file under that name." The hum of the old refrigerator behind her grew louder. "There must be," I said, softer than I intended. "He was here almost every month. Heart issues." "You had a nurse—" I hesitated. "She was with him near the end." The woman stopped typing. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard like she'd just realized something she shouldn't have. "What was her name?" I almost said it easily, but something in her eyes made me pause. "I think—" Her name was Claire. The silence that followed wasn't long, but it was heavy. Like the kind that carries memories. She looked toward the back office, then back at me. "Claire hasn't worked here for some time," she said. "Months, maybe more." Her voice was gentle but careful. "Every word is measured." I nodded, trying to sound casual. "Do you know where she went?" "No," she said too quickly. Then softer, "It's not something we talk about." I blinked. "Not something you talk about?" The woman's hands returned to the keyboard, but she wasn't typing anymore. Just resting them there, as if the motion alone might make me leave. "Some things are better left where they are," she said. "If you want peace, don't go digging." That word, peace, lingered in the air like a warning. Outside, the wind had picked up again. I stepped out onto the clinic steps, the rain starting to fall in thin, hesitant lines. My reflection shimmered on the wet pavement, pale, uncertain, holding more questions than answers. I stood there for a long time, just listening to the rain hit the metal railing, the puddles forming between cracks in the concrete. Every sound felt sharper, like the world had leaned in to listen. My father's voice came back to me then, something he'd said once, half asleep in his hospital bed. "Not everyone who helps you is meant to stay." At the time, I thought he was talking about doctors, or maybe me. But now it feels different. It felt like a secret he'd buried between breaths. I walked back to my car, the wipers moving slowly across the glass. On the passenger seat, I placed the folder I'd brought, empty now, waiting to be filled. My fingers traced the outline of it. The vinyl was cold, almost slick with condensation. If there were no records, how did he receive treatment? Who had signed his discharge forms? At the next red light, I caught myself glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone sitting there. The nurse. Her white uniform faintly lit, her eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. The light turned green, and I drove on. But the image stayed, hovering between memory and invention. Later that night, I called the clinic again. A different voice answered, an older man this time. When I gave my father's name, there was a pause. Then the same line, "I'm sorry, there's no file." I asked about Claire. This time, the silence lasted longer. "You shouldn't be asking about her," he said finally. "She's gone. Let it be." His tone wasn't unkind, but it had weight. The kind of weight that made me feel small, like a child asking about a locked room. Was she a nurse? I asked quietly. He exhaled, almost as if he'd been holding that breath for years. "She was," he said. "Once." The call ended before I could ask what that meant. The house felt colder when I hung up. The kind of cold that doesn't come from weather, but from something missing, something that used to hum quietly in the background of life. I walked into my father's study, where his books still lined the walls, spines faded from years of sunlight. There were medical journals, patient notes, old photos, but no mention of her, not even in the letters he'd written near the end, the ones he never mailed. Only once did I find her name. It was in the corner of a prescription pad. Faint, almost rubbed out, C. Wilkes. Next to it, a half-written word, maybe apology, maybe an appointment. The ink had bled too much to tell. I stared at it until the letters blurred. The pen marks looked like veins, branching out into nothing. I remembered the way she had stood at the funeral, hands clasped, eyes steady but distant. Not mourning, not exactly. Watching, like she was making sure something ended properly. It was that same distance I felt now, between truth and silence. Between care and guilt, the storm outside grew louder, rain tapping against the window like restless fingers. I sat there in the dark, the prescription pad still in my hand. The word "thank you" echoing faintly in my memory, the one written on the back of that photograph. I wondered if "thank you" was all my father ever got from her, or if it was all she could give. Somewhere in the night, a car passed. Its headlights swept briefly across the study wall, catching a frame I hadn't noticed before. A picture half hidden behind stacks of folders. I pulled it down. The glass was cracked, the photo inside slightly water-damaged. It wasn't clear, but I could see my father standing outside the clinic smiling faintly. Beside him, a figure in white. Her face turned again, just out of view, the nurse who never showed her face. I placed the photo on the desk and sat back. The hum of the old clock filled the silence. For the first time I realized the clinic didn't just erase her. My father had helped them, and still, she came to his funeral. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the receptionist's words over and over. Don't go digging, but some silences aren't warnings. They're invitations. I turned off the lamp. In the dark, the photo seemed to glow faintly, as if it had caught its own light. I told myself I'd let it rest, but I knew, even then, I wouldn't. The afternoon light came through the curtains in thin, tired stripes. Dust floated in it, slow and deliberate, like it was remembering how to fall. My father's study had that stillness old rooms have, the kind that feels polite. The desk was where I left it, pushed against the window. It still smelled faintly of wood polish and cigarette smoke, though he hadn't smoked in years. The drawers stuck a little when I pulled them open, swollen with time, with papers that had absorbed too many seasons. I wasn't looking for anything. At least that's what I told myself. I just wanted to understand him a little better. Maybe find something ordinary enough to make sense of his final days. There were receipts from grocery stores long gone. Unsent letters to people I'd never met. A small pocket knife rusted shut. All the remnants of a man who lived half in silence, half in habits. And then, a photograph. It was at the bottom of the third drawer, tucked beneath a pile of blank envelopes. Its edges were curled inward, as if it had been hiding from the years. I lifted it carefully. My father stood in the middle of the frame, younger, his smile less careful. Beside him, my mother. She was wearing her favorite white coat, the one she said made her feel like spring. The photo must have been taken before she got sick. The edges of their hands just touched. The way two people touch when they've forgotten the need to hold on. But it wasn't them that held my eyes. In the corner, barely visible, half turned from the camera, a face, blurry, faded, but unmistakably familiar. The nurse, or maybe not. Maybe it was just someone who happened to look like her. A trick of shadow and memory. Still, my chest tightened as I traced the outline of her figure with my thumb. The photo felt cold, almost damp, like the paper itself had been sweating under the years. I turned it over. On the back, a date written in my father's handwriting, 22 years ago. A small ink blot where his pen must have paused too long. No names, no message, only time, quietly sealing what it didn't want to explain. I placed the photo under the desk lamp, adjusting the light to see better. The reflection shimmered faintly over the glass. The more I looked, the less it felt like a coincidence. The tilt of her head, the stillness in her posture. It was her. The same woman who stood at my father's funeral. The same one who vanished from every record. I sat there for a while, the ticking clock filling the silence. Every few seconds, the sound of a passing car broke through, reminding me the world outside was still moving, even if mine had stopped. I tried to remember if my mother ever mentioned her. A nurse, a caretaker, anyone with kind eyes and quiet steps. But all I could recall was her laughter, light and brief, and the smell of chamomile tea she used to drink before bed. Maybe the nurse had been there too, in the background, unseen. I reached for my father's old magnifier, the one he used to read fine print. I held it over the photograph, the glass catching the yellow glow of the lamp. Her face came into focus just a little, enough to see the outline of her mouth, the shape of her jaw. Her expression wasn't joy or sorrow. It was something in between. Like she knew she wasn't supposed to be in the picture at all. Something moved in my memory then. A sound, faint, like fabric brushing against wood. The way she had touched the coffin at his funeral. That same careful reverence. That same distance. Why was she there both times? My mother had died in that same house, the one my father refused to sell, even after decades of quiet. Had she been their nurse too? Or something else entirely? I turned the photo back over and studied their faces again. My mother's hand on my father's shoulder. The nurse, standing behind them in the corner, half shadow, half witness. There's a kind of intimacy in being present for someone's final days. You see what even their family doesn't. The small regrets, the unspoken fears, the things they whisper when they think the room is asleep, and she had been there, for both of them. The drawer groaned softly as I closed it. The sound echoed through the room, sharp against the silence. For a moment, it felt like the whole house was listening. I looked out the window. The evening light was turning blue, the kind that makes everything look slightly unreal. The reflection of the photograph still glimmered faintly, on the glass like it was. Trying to escape its own image, I remembered my father's voice again, one of his last lucid sentences before the morphine dulled everything. She stayed longer than she should have. At the time, I thought he was talking about me. But now I wasn't so sure. I set the photo on the desk beside the old lamp, next to a cup ring that hadn't faded after all these years. I ran my finger over it, tracing the circle again and again, as if it might unlock something buried beneath the wood. Maybe she wasn't meant to be found in records. Maybe her place was in the margins, in old photographs, in gestures, in the quiet spaces between their lives. The light flickered once. I looked up, nothing. Just the hum of the bulb, steady, patient. Still, I felt watched. Not in a threatening way. More like the house itself had turned its attention toward me, waiting to see what I would do next. The rain began again outside, soft at first, then steadier, tapping against the glass like a pulse. I picked up the photograph one last time. Her face, that half-turn, seemed almost to move under the reflection of the raindrops. I placed it back into the drawer, carefully, like I was putting something to rest. But even as I did, I knew it wasn't over. Some people leave without leaving. They stay in corners, in silence, in the edges of memory, just waiting to be noticed again. When I closed the drawer, it didn't shut all the way, and for a long time, I didn't try to fix it. The air in the morgue always feels borrowed, too cold to belong to the living, too quiet to belong to the dead. When I pushed open the metal door, the hum of the refrigeration units filled the space, low and steady, like breathing from behind a wall. The fluorescent lights flickered once before holding. It was a tired light, pale, forgiving, the kind that doesn't try to flatter anyone. The coroner looked up from his desk. He was smaller than I remembered, or maybe grief had shrunk the space between us. His hair had gone white around the edges, his glasses fogged slightly from the steam of his coffee. He smiled when he saw me, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I heard you were back," he said. "Didn't think you'd come down here." "I needed to ask about my father," I said. "About the nurse." His expression changed. A pause that lasted a breath too long. Then softly, "Ah." He set his coffee aside, the cup leaving a faint ring on the papers beneath it. I could tell he knew what I was talking about before I even said it. He gestured for me to sit. The chair creaked under me. Somewhere in the back, a tray rolled against the wall, metal on tile, sharp and brief. He was handled carefully, he said finally. Whoever prepared him, she knew what she was doing. She? He nodded almost reluctantly. "Do you have her name?" He hesitated again. The kind of hesitation that wasn't about memory but about choice. "It's strange," he murmured. "There's no record of her. Not in the logs, not in the shift sheets." I stared at him. "Then how do you know she was there?" He rubbed at his temple, looking toward the cold storage door. "Because I saw her." His voice thinned, like the words were being pulled out of him. It was late, near midnight. "I came back to check something. She was standing over your father, straightening his collar. Not like a nurse. More like—" He trailed off. "Like what?" He didn't answer. "She said she'd been called?" He continued. "That she was finishing what he'd asked her to." I frowned. "My father asked for her?" He exhaled slowly, the sound almost trembling. "She said he didn't want to be alone. But when I checked the forms later, her signature wasn't anywhere." Not under attendance, not under release. His eyes drifted toward the far corner of the room, where the refrigeration doors stood in a row, 6 in total, each with a faint frost line across its edge. She looked like she belonged here, he said quietly. But not in the way most people do. I followed his gaze. The room felt smaller suddenly, the hum of the units louder. I could almost imagine her standing there, white coat, gloved hands, the same stillness she carried at the funeral. What did she look like? I asked. He blinked. You've seen her? Yes, I said. At the service. She stood behind us. Said she was his nurse. The coroner's hand froze on his pen. That's not possible, he whispered. Why not? He swallowed. Because she left before the body arrived. The hum deepened. Somewhere inside the cold storage, a pipe clicked. Expanding or settling, I couldn't tell. He looked back at me then, his eyes searching my face. He shook his head. I don't know, but when I saw her, it didn't feel wrong exactly, just familiar, like seeing a photograph come to life for a moment. The silence stretched. Would you like to see him? He asked after a while, his tone careful. I hesitated. The last image I had of my father was already softer than I expected. Him in the coffin, looking almost peaceful. The idea of seeing him again, colder, quieter, felt like asking the past to repeat itself. But I nodded anyway. The coroner stood, his keys jangling softly as he walked toward the storage doors. The light above us buzzed faintly. I followed, each step echoing on the tiled floor. He stopped at the second door from the left. The handle was stainless steel, worn smooth from use. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he turned slightly toward me. She stood here, he said, right where you are. Didn't speak. Just looked at him. Then she touched his hand and said, He can rest now. His voice faltered. I didn't ask what she meant. Some things you don't ask. He pulled the handle gently, and the door released with a soft hiss. Cold air drifted out, curling around my wrists. Inside, a white sheet folded perfectly. The kind of neatness that feels like love disguised as ritual. I stared at the outline beneath the sheet. My throat tightened, but I didn't move closer. She said he'd forgiven himself, the coroner murmured. That's all she told me. Forgiven himself. The words didn't sound like my father's. He wasn't a man who believed in forgiveness, not for others, and certainly not for himself. I stepped back, the cold following me. The metal door clicked shut again, final and soft. Do you believe her? I asked. The coroner didn't answer right away. He sat back down, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his coffee again. It had gone cold. He looked at the cup, then at me. I've worked here 30 years, he said. I've seen faces that don't leave you. Hers was one of them. I wanted to ask what he meant, but I didn't. I could tell he didn't want to speak her name again. Instead, I thanked him and walked toward the door. My hand hesitated on the push bar. Behind me, his voice came softly. Be careful what you're looking for, kid. The dead don't always stay quiet when you call them back. Outside, the evening air felt heavier. The smell of disinfectant clung to my coat. I turned once more toward the building, the windows dull, the light inside flickering. For a moment, I thought I saw movement near the doorway, a figure in white just standing. But when I blinked, there was only the reflection of the parking lot light. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that she had been there, watching. Not haunting, not comforting, just waiting. Maybe she had been the last to see him alive, or maybe she'd been waiting long before he was gone. The cold followed me home. The road narrowed after the last streetlight. From there, it was just gravel and trees, the kind that leaned close enough to listen. My headlights caught the house before I saw it. A small white cottage, roof sagging, wind chimes made of glass vials tapping softly against each other. They caught what little light there was, tiny flickers like trapped stars. I parked a little away from the gate. The air smelled like wet bark and something faintly metallic. For a moment, I just sat there, engine ticking, hands resting on the steering wheel, the address written in the corner of an old receipt book still open on the seat beside me. It didn't feel like a coincidence. It felt like an invitation. The cottage stood at the edge of the woods, half swallowed by ivy. Curtains drawn, porch light off. Still, there was something alive about it. Not warm, but aware. I knocked once. The sound felt too loud for the kind of silence that followed. When no one answered, I tried the handle. It turned easily. The smell hit me first. Antiseptic, lavender, and something old. Paper, maybe, or rain that never quite dried. It was clean in a way that didn't feel fresh. Inside, everything was neatly arranged. Not lived in, but curated. A teacup on the counter, washed and turned upside down. A clock with its hands stopped at 2:17. A stack of books by the window, all medical, all underlined in pencil. On the table sat a vase of white carnations wilting at the edges. And beside them, a fountain pen. I knew it before I touched it. The weight of it, the black lacquer, the gold nib slightly bent from years of use. My father's pen. I picked it up slowly. It left a faint ink stain on my thumb, still wet, as if it had been used not long ago. I looked around the room again, careful this time. A coat draped over a chair. A shawl by the door. Someone had been here, recently. I almost called out. But my voice felt wrong in this house. So instead, I listened. The only sound was the wind pressing through the glass vials outside, soft, hollow notes that almost formed a tune. Then I saw it, a picture frame on the mantel. A simple wooden frame, slightly chipped at the corners. It was me, 7, maybe 8 years old, standing in our old backyard, holding a paper kite. The photo was one my mother had taken. I remembered her hands shaking the camera, laughing when the kite tangled in the tree. I hadn't seen that photo in years. And yet, here it was, in a stranger's house. The air seemed to shift then, heavier, closer. I set the pen down, carefully. I walked to the hallway. The walls were lined with certificates, nursing credentials, dated over 2 decades. A few black and white photos of hospital wards. A nameplate on one of them, faded but legible. M. Dyer, the same name on the road sign outside. Her handwriting matched the one in my father's old journals. I'd seen it before. Notes scribbled in the margins of his research papers, initials he never explained. The connection started to make sense. And then it didn't. Why my picture? Why his pen? The floor creaked softly beneath me as I stepped deeper inside. The bedroom door was half open. Inside, the air was colder. A small cot covered in white linen. A lamp still on, casting a dull amber glow over the room, and on the dresser, a small stack of letters tied with a ribbon. The top one had my father's name on it. The handwriting was elegant, measured. The kind of writing people used when they were afraid to shake. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I looked at the walls, lined with more photos, some recent, some old. My father is in his 20s, smiling awkwardly beside a group of hospital staff. A younger version of the woman I'd seen at the funeral, hair darker, eyes soft, tired. The nurse. Her face was gentle in the picture, almost kind. But there was something distant in it, too, as if she already knew how the story would end. A floorboard behind me sighed. I turned fast, hard in my throat, but no one was there, only the sound of the wind chimes again, louder now, pressing against the silence like a heartbeat. I picked up the letter then. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. The ink was old, faded, but the words were careful. He said you reminded him of Light, that even as a child, you looked at him like he was something worth saving. I kept that look. I kept everything he left behind. There was no signature, just those words. I placed the letter back and stepped away, breathing shallow. My reflection caught in the dresser mirror, pale, unfamiliar. For a second, I thought I saw a movement in the reflection. A woman's outline near the doorway, watching. I turned. Nothing. Only the faint swing of a curtain and the soft smell of lavender in the air. When I left the house, dusk had settled. The wind chimes played a slower song now, the glass catching the last of the light. I stood by the car for a while, the pen still in my pocket. The house looked smaller from the outside, quieter. I wanted to believe she had cared for him out of duty. That the photo, the pen, the letter were all remnants of kindness, not something else. But as I looked at those dark windows, I couldn't tell where care ended and guilt began. Some houses hold their secrets in silence. Others display them like trophies. This one did both. I turned the key in the ignition, and for a brief moment, the headlights caught something in the window. A shadow, slight, familiar. She was standing there. Or maybe it was only the curtain. Either way, I drove off before I could find out. On the road back, the trees closed in again. The glass vials clinked faintly in the distance until the sound disappeared behind me. In my pocket, the pen left another smudge of ink. Dark, fresh. Impossible. I didn't wipe it off, I just kept driving. The house shrinking in the rearview mirror until the forest swallowed it whole. And still, in the hum of the engine, I could hear her voice. Faint, almost kind. He didn't want to be alone. I didn't know if she meant my father, or me. The ink dried slowly on my thumb, black and glistening like something still alive. The rain started before dawn. A slow, steady sound, like fingers tapping on glass. I remember thinking it felt too careful, like the sky was trying not to wake anyone. On the table beside me lay the small leather book. It wasn't locked, but it felt like it should have been. Its surface was soft, worn smooth by hands that turned its pages often. I hadn't opened it yet, not fully. It waited, quiet, patient, like something that already knew what I'd find inside. I'd taken it from the nurse's drawer the night before, just before leaving the house on Dyer Road. It had been tucked beneath a folded towel, hidden but not hidden enough. There was dust on everything else, not on this. Now, in the half-light of morning, I sat by the kitchen window and finally opened it. The first page smelled faintly of old ink and something floral, lavender maybe. The handwriting was small and neat. And beneath that, a short note, never more than a sentence. Mrs. L. slept peacefully. Mr. K. asked for forgiveness. Child refused to let go. The words were written in a way that made them sound less like medical notes and more like goodbyes. Then I turned to another page, and there, my father's name. I read it slowly, as though saying it in my head might somehow bring him closer. Dr. Hart. Stable, lucid, gentle. The date matched the week before he died. The note beneath read simply, "He said it felt lighter this time." I didn't understand what that meant, but it made my throat tighten. I turned the page again. More names. More final moments. Each line felt like a whisper sealed in paper. And then, my father's name again. Same handwriting. Same calm spacing. But a new date. 1 week after his official death. The ink looked darker. Fresher. As if written later. Maybe even after everything else had been packed away. I froze. The page trembling slightly under my thumb. The note beside it was short. Almost reverent. He still waits for her answer. For a long time, I didn't move. The room was too still, too present. Even the rain had gone quiet, falling in softer patterns now, like a hush. I read the line again. The ink was I turned back a few pages, scanning the other entries for anything similar. But none did. Every other line was matter of fact, complete. Only his sounded unfinished, like the conversation hadn't ended. And again. Until the words stopped being words and became something else. A rhythm, a heartbeat. He still waits for her answer. Slightly smudged at the edge, as if the pen had lingered too long. Who was her? And what was the question? The ledger suddenly felt heavier in my hands, like it had weight beyond paper. I tried to breathe, but the air in the room felt too thin. The pen mark bled faintly through the back of the page. Small, dark, final. Yet the words refused to settle. He still waits for her answer. I whispered it aloud this time. My voice cracked halfway through. The house didn't echo it back. I don't remember standing, but I was suddenly pacing. The floor creaked beneath me, the same slow rhythm my father used to keep when he thought. I looked at his photograph on the wall, the one from before he got sick. The faint smile, the steady eyes. He'd been a man of logic, of answers. He didn't believe in things that couldn't be proven. And yet, here I was, holding a record that said he was still waiting for one. I sat back down, opened the ledger again, slower this time. Between the pages, something thin was tucked, a small scrap of paper folded twice. It took me a moment to realize what it was, a prescription slip, my father's handwriting, not hers. Just 3 words written across the blank line. Forgive her, please. No date. No signature. Only the familiar loop of his pen strokes. The faint indentation where he'd pressed harder than usual. Forgive her. The ledger slipped from my lap and hit the floor with a soft sound. The pages fanned open, revealing dozens of lives. Dozens of endings. And somewhere among them, my father's, written twice. The rain has stopped completely now. The window fogged slightly from my breath. I could see my reflection in the glass, pale, wide-eyed, half there. I tried to remember if he'd ever spoken of her, the nurse, the woman in the photograph, the shadow that seemed to follow every piece of him I found. Maybe he had. Maybe I hadn't been listening then. A thought crept in quietly, the kind that changes everything once it arrives. What if she wasn't a stranger? What if he'd known her long before the illness? The way he'd sometimes stare at the window, smiling faintly as though hearing someone I couldn't. Maybe that was her. The nurse who signed nothing. The woman who kept my picture. The one who wrote about him after he was gone. I looked down at the ledger again. The ink shimmered faintly in the light, as though still wet. I reached out to close it. But before I did, I noticed the last page, blank, except for one line, written at the very bottom in a different hand, lighter. Almost hesitant, I told him I'd come back. For a long time, I just stared at it. The air around me felt suddenly too large, like the house itself had stepped back to listen. Outside, the clouds were clearing. The wet road glistened faintly, catching bits of daylight between puddles. I closed the ledger, the leather soft and cool against my palms. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the middle of a story I hadn't been meant to find. I slipped the prescription note between its pages, where his name appeared the second time. Then I set it gently on the table. My fingers still trembled, ink-stained from where I'd touched the words too long. The smudge looked almost like a bruise. Somewhere, far off, wind moved through the trees. The house seemed to exhale with it. He still waits for her answer. I said the line again, this time quietly. Not as a question, but as if reading a prayer that was never meant to be finished. The sky broke open just before dusk, light spilling through in soft bands across the fields. I could see the road that led to Dyer's cottage, a thin silver line disappearing into the woods. I thought about driving back, but the idea felt too much like chasing a ghost that no longer wanted to be found. Instead, I stayed by the window, watching the light shift, the shadows bend, the ledger lying still on the table behind me. Sometimes, the past doesn't hide, it just waits, patiently, like a question left unanswered. And maybe that was all this ever was, a conversation between two people who forgot to stop talking. The ink on my hand had dried by then, but under the skin, it still felt warm. The cupboard door groaned when I opened it. That slow, tired sound of wood remembering how to move. Dust drifted out like it had been waiting for air. Inside, nothing much. Some folded linens, a cracked teacup, a jar of old coins. And then, pushed all the way to the back, a cassette player, gray, boxy, with a red record button that had lost its shine. I could almost hear my father's voice just looking at it. For a long moment, I didn't touch it. Some things in a house hum even when they're quiet, and that little machine felt like it was humming at me. But curiosity is louder than fear. So I pressed play. The room is filled with static. It sounded like rain behind glass. Then a pause, and a breath I knew too well. If you're hearing this... I froze. Then I didn't get to explain. It was my father's voice, soft, deliberate, almost apologetic. The kind of voice you use when you've already rehearsed the pain in your head too many times. "There was a girl," he said. "The girl we lost." The words landed like dust settling on skin. He wasn't crying. He never did. But there was something inside his tone, like a door half shut on a memory that didn't want to stay hidden. "She looked just like her mother," he said. "Only quieter. The nurse said she'd sleep through storms." The tape hissed again. Static swallowed his next few words. I leaned closer, afraid to blink. The nurse knew. She always knew. My hands started to tremble. The machine crackled, coughed, and then... "Amira." My name. He said it flatly. Not tenderly. Not as a father would. "Patient 47, he continued, almost reading. "Stable, responsive, no family identified." I stopped breathing. It took me a few seconds to realize I'd pressed pause. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my pulse in my ears. Patient 47 stared at the player like it had just spoken a language only I wasn't meant to understand. The tape felt heavier now, as if the truth had weight. As if lies once recorded sink deeper into the plastic. I pressed play again. "She was never supposed to stay," he said. "After the fire, we were just trying to save what was left. The nurse, she said it wouldn't matter. No one would ask." I could hear his breath shaking. Not from age, from guilt. She looked so much like her. Like the one we lost. I don't know how long I sat there. The voice kept looping through me like water through cracks. Every word rewrote something I thought I knew. My father, the man who taught me to ride a bicycle, who laughed too hard at old radio shows, who never liked cameras, was now a stranger reading from a confession. I reached for the stop button but couldn't. The tape kept playing. "We tried to tell ourselves it was mercy," he whispered. "That love could rewrite blood." His words bled into silence. Then came a sound I hadn't heard since his final days, his quiet hum. He used to hum while fixing clocks, mending small things that had forgotten how to tick. Now, it sounded like he was trying to mend time itself. I sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor, the cassette between my knees. The walls looked different now, smaller, closer. Every shadow felt like it had been keeping this secret with him. "If she ever finds this," he said finally, "tell her I tried." The tape clicked. Stopped. The silence afterward wasn't silence at all. It was the sound of something shifting inside me, like a floorboard that's been waiting years to creak. I stared at the recorder. My reflection wavered faintly on its dull surface. For the first time, I didn't recognize the face looking back. The girl he raised, was she a daughter? Or a patient he couldn't let go of? The question hung there, breathing with me. I rewound the tape. Pressed play again. This time I listened differently. Not as a daughter trying to remember a father's voice, but as a stranger trying to understand what she was to him. Every pause between his words sounded louder. Every sigh felt deliberate. I began to imagine the scene. The dim hospital light, the nurse standing in the... I thought about the nurse, Elle Whitlock. Her name had followed me through files, certificates, and half-remembered conversations. And now, it sat in front of me waiting to be read. My hands didn't feel like mine when I opened it. The paper crackled softly, like a confession being exhaled. "My dear Elle," it began. "I have rewritten this letter too many times, but words keep changing shape when guilt touches them." I stopped reading for a second. He never wrote like that. Not the man who fixed things by hammer, who believed every problem had a screw you could tighten. The letter went on. "I made a promise the night she died. You remember. You were there. The child that lived was not the one we were meant to keep." My breath caught. I read it again, slowly. The words blurred. "The hospital was in chaos," it continued. "The storm had cut the power. The files were wet. Names got swapped. But I couldn't bear to lose her twice. You told me we could protect her, that no one had to know." The sound of the refrigerator in the corner grew louder. Or maybe the silence did. He wrote of a child switched at birth, a promise made to protect, and a secret he couldn't die with. I tried to read between the lines, to hear his voice, not just the ink. I imagined him writing it, maybe late at night. That small desk in the garage, a lamp flickering weakly, his hands trembling from age or truth. I pictured him folding the letter carefully, sliding it into the coat he wore every day. Maybe he meant to deliver it. Maybe he couldn't. Outside, the sky turned a flat kind of gray. No rain, no light? Just waiting. I pressed my thumb to the signature. It left a small oil mark. Proof that I was still here, still touching something that shouldn't exist. The words looped in my head. The child that lived was not the one we were meant to keep. Not the one we were meant to keep. My whole life I had felt borrowed, like I was living inside someone else's story, waiting for the real owner to come back. Now I understand why the nurse. The same name on my mother's death certificate. The same hand that signed me into this world had also rewritten who I was. Maybe she had watched from afar all these years, making sure the secret didn't spill. Maybe every doctor's visit, every small coincidence wasn't a coincidence at all. I remembered once, as a child, a woman standing by the gate of my school. She had gray hair pulled tight, a kind face I couldn't place. She smiled at me, then turned away when I waved. Back then I thought she was a stranger. Now I wasn't sure. I read the last lines of the letter again. I am sorry for what we did. But when I looked at her, I couldn't see a lie. Only the daughter I was meant to have. He hadn't signed it with his full name. Just an initial. Like he knew some truths shouldn't be spoken too loud, even on paper. I sat there until the sun shifted across the wall, touching the letter, then pulling away. The house made small sounds, the kind old wood makes when it's remembering things. For the first time, I wondered if my memories belonged to me. Every birthday, every bedtime story, every photograph. Had they all been built on someone else's absence? I folded the letter back into its envelope, slipped it into the pocket where I'd found it. The lining tore a little as I did. A small sharp sound. Like something giving way, the coat smelled of him again. Of rain, smoke, and guilt. I hung it back exactly where it had been. The hanger creaked softly, as if it exhaled. That night I couldn't sleep. The letter burned behind my eyes every time I closed them. I kept hearing his voice. Not the man from the tapes, not the father I knew, but someone quieter. Someone asking to be forgiven. In the dark, I whispered her name. L. Whitlock. It felt strange in my mouth, like saying the name of a ghost who never really left. Was she still out there? Had she ever stopped watching? I thought about the debt my father mentioned, a debt being paid in silence, and I wondered if that debt was me. By morning, the light was softer. The world had gone on pretending nothing had changed, but I made tea, didn't drink it. Just listened to the sound of it cooling. Then, without fully deciding, I took the coat again. My fingers slipped into the pocket, felt the envelope, and this time I didn't put it back. I folded it into my bag. Because some ghosts don't rest until you look them in the eye. As I stepped outside, the wind caught the edges of the trees. Leaves swirled, small and restless, like the world was holding its breath. And for the first time, I let myself wonder out loud, whose daughter am I? Really? A beginning of a truth that was finally ready to speak. The snow started quietly. No wind, no sound, just flakes falling like ash over the headstones. Each one melted as it touched the marble, as if the dead were still too warm to hold it. I hadn't planned to come back. But something in the air, a weight, a pull, brought me there again. The path was half buried, the ground soft and uneven beneath my boots. My breath came out white and slow. And there she was, kneeling beside his grave. The nurse. Her coat was the same muted gray as the sky. She moved her hand over the stone, brushing away the thin frost. Careful, familiar, like she'd done it 100 times before. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just watched her. Her shoulders rose and fell with the rhythm of someone talking to herself, or to him. The world felt smaller around us. Even the birds had gone quiet. When she turned, she didn't look startled. Just ready. Her eyes were pale, tired, but steady. And when she smiled, it wasn't polite. It was something older, sad, and almost maternal. "I thought you might come," she said. Her voice was softer than I expected. Like someone who'd spent her whole life whispering near hospital beds. I stepped closer. The snow cracked beneath me. For a second, I could hear nothing but the sound of my own pulse. She looked down at the grave again. Her gloved hand rested on his name, my father's name, the edges traced as though she still needed to remember how to spell it. "He wanted you to know," she murmured, not looking up. "Before you hated him forever." The wind shifted. It caught her. I didn't trust my voice enough to speak. so I just nodded. And that was enough. She reached into her coat pocket, slow and deliberate. When her hand emerged, she held something small, a locket, brass, worn smooth at the hinges. She pressed it into my palm. It was warm from her touch. I kept it, she said, because I thought someday you might come looking. Her gloves brushed my fingers as she let go. The contact was brief, but it felt like something passing through time. I opened it. Inside, a photograph had long faded into a blur of faces, and beside it, engraved in tiny letters, a name. Not mine, not anyone I'd ever heard. The metal felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than memory. I looked up at her, waiting for her to explain. But she didn't rush. She just watched me with the patience of someone who'd already lived through the story twice. That was her, she said quietly, the one who didn't make it. Her words moved slowly, each one careful not to break. She was your mother's firstborn. The storm that night. It took her before the morning came. But your father couldn't let go of the idea that she was still meant to be here. So she stopped herself. I looked away. When you arrived, he thought it was a second chance. He thought love could rewrite what was written. The cemetery around us blurred. The air, the snow, the sky, everything felt suspended. I looked down at the grave, at the flowers frozen mid-bloom. All this time I'd thought I was searching for a lie, but what I'd found was something else. A wound disguised as mercy. She knelt again, pressing her palm flat against the ground. He never forgave himself, she said. Even when he smiled at you, even when he taught you how to ride that old blue bicycle, he was always waiting for the day you'd ask who you really were. Her voice trembled just once, then steadied again. I told him, she whispered, you already were his. From the moment he chose to be your father. I crouched beside her. The cold seeped through my knees, but I didn't move. The headstone looked smaller from here, less like an ending and more like a doorway. Why didn't you tell me? I asked finally. My voice came out thin, almost childlike. She looked at me. Really looked. I wanted to, she said. Many times. But he asked me to let you grow up whole. Not half and half like him. The snow started falling harder then. It gathered on her hat, her gloves, the locket still open in my hand. I could smell the faint sharpness of winter soil, the kind that hides life beneath it. He thought the truth would break you, she added. He didn't know it might set you free. For a while, we just sat there. Two women bound by a man who couldn't tell the truth until after he was gone. She looked so small beside his grave, a figure carved out of loyalty and guilt. I watched over you, she said quietly. Not because he asked me to, but because I needed to see that the choice didn't destroy everything it touched. Her eyes softened, a faint sheen of moisture gathering there. Then she smiled again, the same tired, knowing smile she'd given me before. I suppose it didn't, she said. You're still standing. I didn't know what to say. Thank you for feeling too small. I'm sorry I felt too misplaced, so I did the only thing I could. I reached out, and for the first time I touched her hand. It was colder than the snow, but steady. She squeezed once, gently, as if to seal something between us. Then she rose to her feet, brushed the snow from her coat. Keep it, she said, nodding toward the locket, not as proof, just as memory, and then she turned. Walked down the path without looking back. The sky was beginning to clear. The kind of light that only comes after snowfall, pale, forgiving. I stayed a while longer. The locket lay open in my palm. A name I didn't know. A life I'd never lived. And yet somehow, it felt like both were still part of me. I whispered her name once into the cold. It sounded strange in my voice, like speaking to a sister I'd never met. The truth hadn't changed who I was. It just explained the shape of my reflection. When I finally stood, I brushed the snow from his headstone. My fingers lingered there, tracing the grooves of his name. "I know now," I said softly, "and I don't hate you." As I walked away, the snow began again. Small flakes, quiet as breath. Behind me, the nurse's footprints were already fading. The world was covering our meeting as gently as it had revealed it, and for the first time in a long while, I felt watched over,